The drunken words spewed by a regular of good chicken were to blame. The meeting was supposed to take place at the Hanbit Academy of Mental Calculation at exactly 7 o'clock. The academy director wrote the words Taegwang Tenant's emergency meeting on the chalkboard and waited. It was 20 past 7, but still no one came. He walked toward the back of the classroom and surveyed its handiwork. What hadn't been apparent close up was now obvious. The words slanted down from the second syllable, so that the last word ended up a handspan below. Even his sense of balance broke down as he grew old. When he was young, he used to hold 2 pieces of chalk between his fingers and drag them across the board, drawing double lines so straight as if they'd been done with a ruler. He still felt like a 17-year-old who could run a 100-meter dash in 13 seconds. He scolded himself for longing his youth. There was still so much left to do. He went back to the chalkboard and erased everything except for the first syllable. He tried again, his tongue poking out. He was making the last stroke when the door banged open, startling him. The shuffle of flip-flops approached. His writing turned crooked once more. Someone stole another tambourine. It's the 5th one already. What would anybody want with a tambourine? It was the girl from Billboard Karaoke on the basement level. The director carefully erased the final stroke and made another attempt. Then he stood at the lectern and looked at the girl's exposed feet. You're late. You probably think you've got all the time in the world, but time doesn't wait for you. Don't have regrets when you're old like me. Live each day like it's your last. She stared blankly at him from her seat and slapped her flip-flop against her bare heel. Right then, Miss Jung from Good Chicken dashed in, bringing in with her the smell of fried food. She looked around the classroom. They're not here yet? Don't they know what time it is? She had donned a plastic apron on top of her sheer fuchsia dress. The apron was splattered with grease and batter, and had faded so much it was difficult to tell what color it had once been. Ah, sorry, game just ended, said Mr. Jong as he rushed in, still wearing arm sleeves and his fingertips stained with chalk. If you win twice, you've got to lose one. It's the only way they'll back off. Mr. Jong was the owner of Pinto's Billiards on the 2nd floor. His eyes were bloodshot from calculating hourly rates and watching cue balls bounce around the table all day. Mrs. Park complained as she climbed the stairs. I've got to drag myself up here like this because they couldn't wait 2 days until the retreat? Am I the only one with a million things to do? Her grumbling was punctuated by pauses. The weight she had put on suddenly made climbing the stairs difficult. When she finally reached the 3rd floor, she hung onto the academy door, catching her breath. By the time the master of Korukyo Taekwondo School jogged down from the 4th floor in his white uniform and indoor shoes, it was already 7:40. At this hour, the academy was the only place they could gather. The child-sized desks and chairs, arranged neatly facing the chalkboard until the adults had sat in them, were now askew. They stared at the academy director, who stood at the chalkboard with a stick of white chalk in his hand, and fidgeted to find more comfortable positions. The annual team-building retreat was the only time all tenants came together, since each one had different business hours. They began to talk about the actual reason for their emergency meeting. Just past midnight the day before, a man had stepped into Good Chicken. Miss Jong, who had been frying chicken, heard the door open and poked her head out of the kitchen. He glanced about with bleary eyes and stood swaying in the same spot. His dress shirt had come untucked from his pants and was wrinkled like a crumpled sheet of paper. She quickly removed her apron and ushered him to table number 2. Oh, you've had a lot to drink. She was used to drunk customers. They could be as aggressive as wild dogs or meek as babies. Good Chicken was a last stop for many, a place they dropped by for a nightcap after drinking all evening. At partitioned tables, men chugged beer, sitting slouched back in their seats. The man ordered a half chicken with spicy marinade and a pint of beer, but Miss Jong chopped up a whole chicken instead, dredging the pieces in flour and then dropping them in the pressure fryer. The chicken crackled as it hit the hot oil. While she fried chicken and poured beer, hands waved above the partitions to get her attention. She rushed here and there, serving more beer and pickled radish, and had her arm clutched by many. Sitting down next to the man, she tore the chicken into bite-sized pieces and shoved them into his mouth. Most fell under his chair. The wooden floor was littered with cubed radish and coleslaw the other customers had dropped. The bits of food gleamed in the red light. Mrs. Park from the skewer shop interrupted Miss Jong. "Hey, we don't have all day. My skewers are about to turn to coal. Plus, how can you believe the words of a drunk?" She stuck her index finger in her hair and scratched her scalp. Dandruff flaked out instantly. The academy director wrote the word credibility on the chalkboard. "You think all drunk customers are the same?" Miss Jong said, crossing her arms over her chest. "I guess the men who go to your shop are all full of hogwash." Mrs. Park jumped to her feet, sending her seat crashing behind her. "Oh, you can bet our customers aren't the same. Just like how you and I aren't the same, even though we both sell liquor. I don't powder my face like a ghost and play around with drunks for some measly change. I sell food and drink. I don't entertain men." Miss Jong glared at Miss Park. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say you're jealous." Mr. Jong from the pool hall, who had been sitting between the two women, intervened. "Now what's that got to do with why we're all here? Let's hear what happened." Once again, the seat buried itself in Mrs. Park's fleshy rear end. The academy director underlined credibility and said, "Mrs. Jong, please try to give a brief summary of what happened. Your customers will be coming soon." Miss Jong covered her mouth and laughed. "A brief summary? Oh, I don't know how to do that, but I'll try. Now, where was I?" "He dropped some chicken on the floor," Mr. Jong said quickly. The man drank beer, his mouth full of chicken. Pieces fell in his glass and floated in the foam. Miss Jong attached herself to his side and said, "If you don't like chicken, I can get you something else. How about some fruit I bought this morning?" The man grew almost cross-eyed. "I'm not drunk. You want to hear a secret?" Clasping her face with both hands, he pulled her toward him until her face was inches from his own. The smell of chicken, beer, and tooth decay hit her. "This is a secret. You can't tell anyone. Miss Young, you know I love you, don't you? This building's gonna change hands soon. You know, the amusement park nearby, that owner's buying this place. Then he's gonna knock this whole thing down and build studio apartments." Miss Jung stopped talking. Everyone, including the director, was quiet. "Maybe it's just a rumor," Mr. Jung said, rubbing his chalk-covered fingers together. His fingertips were peeling from psoriasis. "I thought so too at first. I assumed he was just drunk. But he didn't forget to take any of his change. Trust me, a drunk person never does that. I even called him this morning to make sure, and he was shocked. He denied everything. If he hadn't been telling the truth, there would be no reason for him to act that way." "That's right," Mr. Jung chimed in. "Most of the time, men just pretend to be drunk so they can cop a feel." The chalkboard was crowded with the words boiled down from Miss Jung's account. Amusement park, change hands, new construction, studio apartments. The Taekwondo master, who despite his small size was nicknamed Arnold Schwarzenegger because of his muscular body, finally spoke up. "I'm completely opposed." His slight stammer lent his words weight. The director wrote in large letters, pressing the chalk hard against the board, "Completely opposed." It was something he did whenever he stressed important information to his students. Bits of crushed chalk clung to the letters. "Then who will talk to the owner on our behalf?" Everyone looked at the director. He drew his lips into a thin line. "I guess it would be best to speak to him at the retreat?" asked Miss Jung. "He'll be in a better mood after a few drinks." Everyone agreed. They dispersed one by one. The director straightened the desks again, but because he was upset, they kept going crooked. Even the writing on the chalkboard slanted down and was no different from his first attempt. The slanted writing bothered him. Mrs. Park hurried down the stairs after Miss Jung. "Now that I've had a good look while it's still light out, you're definitely no spring chicken. 34? Yeah, right. How old are you really?" Miss Jung whipped around and glared at Mrs. Park, who stood several steps above her, dressed in baggy pants. They were the sort with an elastic waistband, but it was buried deep in the folds of her flesh. "You got something against me? You better watch it," Miss Jung cried. "Don't get all riled up now. All your wrinkles are showing," yelled Mrs. Park, hitching up her pants. "Mind your own business," Miss Jung snapped, continuing down the stairs. "I heard you buy cheap ginkgo nuts from China and pass them off as local. And don't you use expired chicken gizzards?" Mrs. Park barreled down the stairs and grabbed Miss Jung by the hair. "How the hell would you know? Did you see me? Did you see me do it?" Miss Jung shrieked, stumbling as she was yanked this way and that. She reached back and scratched the older woman in the face and chest. Mr. Jung and Arnold ran down the stairs to break up the fight. Mrs. Park tried to fight off the men so that she could go after the younger woman who fled down the stairs. Mrs. Park stood in front of her skewer shop, which still reeked of varnish. Displayed in the front window were all sorts of skewers. These plastic replicas looked a lot fresher and tastier than the real thing. The renovation had been completed 2 weeks ago. Bright fluorescent lights had replaced dim-tinted lights, and some of the tightly packed tables had been removed to create more space. She'd even put in a bar where the grill would be prominently displayed. 2 years before, she had blindly trusted a newspaper ad about a skewer business being lucrative, and had opened a shop using the insurance settlement she had received from her husband's death. But within a few days of opening, she realized she was late in the game. There were over 50 skewer franchises in the country alone. Skewer businesses had once been hot, but were fading fast. All the shops looked the same, with their wooden interiors and seating so cramped one's knees touched those of the person opposite. Even the menus were the same. Her franchisor also proved to be unstable. One day, the refrigerated truck that delivered supplies and key ingredients simply stopped coming. She called the headquarters, but the number was no longer in service. She couldn't get her deposit back. For several months, she had no customers and just shelled out money for rent. Her oldest was in 9th grade and the youngest in 6th grade. She used all her savings to renovate the shop. She changed the interior and expanded the menu, developing a marinade from ketchup and chili pepper paste to suit the tastes of young people, even children. During the day, before the evening customers came, she opened a small window on one side of the front display and sold skewers off a grill to passing children and housewives. Business was just about to pick up. She stood outside her shop, looking up at her sign. She was on her feet every day, grilling skewers from 10 in the morning to midnight. As they cooked, the marinade burned and stung her eyes. Her eyes were always bloodshot, and her face lost its suppleness from being exposed to smoke all day, like a piece of sausage hanging in a smokehouse. The scratches on her face and chest prickled. Though she had been the one to pick the fight with Miss Jung, rage still boiled in the pit of her stomach. Just then she remembered the skewers she had left on the grill. The pieces of chicken were like lumps of coal, scorched beyond recognition. Miss Jung ran a brush through her disheveled hair and discovered a fistful of hair had come out with the brush. "Don't let anyone look down on you. Don't show a single tear." She was never the first to pick a fight, but if someone did, she didn't lose. It didn't matter if it was Mrs. Park or Mr. Kwok, the building owner. She'd even grab drunks by the collar and force them to settle the bill. Except for the fake tears she sometimes shed before men, she couldn't remember the last time she had genuinely cried. She opened her compact and coated her puff with powder. She looked in the mirror at the crow's feet around her eyes like the cracks in a dried-up field. She pressed hard at the lines with her puff. She felt most at ease here. Inside her dim fried chicken joint, she was forever 34. To block out the sun, she had covered the window looking out onto the street with a tinted plastic sheet. There were no other windows. When the chicken was done cooking, the pressure fryer expelled steam through the outside exhaust vent. 2 fans were installed on the walls, always running, removing the stale smell of cigarette smoke, vinegar, and grease. The blades were sticky with grease, covered with a thick layer of dust, like iron filings on a magnet. She closed up at 2 a.m. each night, went home, and slept until noon. She needed to shampoo her greasy hair at least twice. Her skin was pasty, since she had started wearing too much makeup from an early age. As she grew older, her makeup grew thicker. She headed to the shop by 5 to meet the truck that delivered raw chicken, flour mix, and marinade. To save on employee costs, she didn't provide takeout or delivery services. After donning her apron, the first thing she did was to make the batter and skim all the burned bits from the oil. Used oil tended to foam. She swept the floor and sometimes burned mugwort to freshen the air. It was time for the customers to start coming in. She pinned her hair back and put on her apron. The middle of the thick slab of tree trunk, which she used as a cutting board, was sunken from the years of chopping. Nibbling her lower lip, Miss Jung swung her cleaver and chopped the chicken into pieces as if she were attacking it. The director sat hunched at a desk in the classroom and ate the food his wife had packed for him. It was so bland it almost tasted bitter. But if he didn't stick to his diet, his blood sugar level increased right away. It was at a previous Taekwon team building retreat that he discovered he had diabetes. There had been a long line of people waiting in front of the portable toilet, so he had gone searching for a private spot down the hill. Ants had swarmed toward his glucose-saturated urine. That evening he had a late dinner because of the emergency meeting. His wife packed him both lunch and dinner, since he always had a lot of things to do, even after all the other teachers had gone home. He swallowed the rest of his food. Kwok, the owner of Taegwang Building, was a vigorous, healthy man in his mid-30s. Though it was not yet 9 in the evening, he was already drunk. He weaved his car through back alleys in order to avoid roadside checks. Only when he had parked the car in the small lot behind Taegwang Building was he able to relax. Drowsiness suddenly swept over him. He turned off the engine and climbed out of his black BMW. The back of the building was more run down than the front. Muggy, foul-smelling steam blasted from the exhaust vent of good chicken and wrapped around his legs. The garbage bags piled on one side of the lot gave off such a terrible stench. Kwok walked in front of the building and stood before the main entrance. 2 men slipped into good chicken. The red interior light shone through the tear in the plastic sheet covering through the window. Though it was dusk, he could see the chipped and missing tiles on the outer wall. The letters that had spelled Taegwang Building had fallen off with the exception of one which barely hung on. During the day, the sign was still visible by the dust that used to outline the letters. Kwok jammed his hands in his pockets and slowly climbed the stairs. Billboard karaoke, good chicken, and the skewer shop. Pinto's Billiards with a picture of a cue ball in every window. Hanbit Mental Calculation Academy, and the Koguryo Taekwondo School. Every one of these businesses was bringing down the building's value. He felt annoyed at the thought of going on a retreat with these people in 2 days. It had been his father's idea to hold an annual team-building retreat with all the tenants. Even after his death, he still exerted power over Kwok. His father had run a study hall on the 5th floor. After Kwok graduated from high school, his father sent him to study abroad in America, since no university in Korea would accept him with his grades. The subjects he ended up studying in America, paid for in American dollars, weren't very practical. He returned to Korea only when his father died. His father's entire wealth became Kwok's. The first thing he did was shut down the study hall. He didn't want to spend the rest of his days like his father, sitting by the door accepting small change from students or supervising the boys and girls sections. The students had called for his father the Owl. At the start of every school year, the names of the students who had been accepted to prestigious universities were printed on a banner and hung in front of the building. His father had hoped Kwok's name would be included in that list one day. The banner used to appear regularly in Kwok's dreams, but when he had seen the wooden cubicle desks piled high outside the building, he finally felt free. It's not that he hadn't considered repairing the building. He was no expert, but he knew the cost of fixing an old building like this would be a considerable task. Plus, he'd still be left with the children's shouts that rang out from the Taekwondo school downstairs all day long. What he wanted was to sell the building and use the money to build an elegant restaurant on the city's outskirts with a stage for live music. He passed the bathroom, whose door was cracked open. The smell of ammonia stung his eyes. Kwok kicked the door, but it swung open again because of its rusty hinges. Frowning, Kwok walked up to his room on the 5th floor. The old building didn't have an elevator. Even if it had been a 22-story tower, his father most certainly wouldn't have installed one to save on electricity costs. The director of the academy called out to Kwok, following up the stairs and standing close behind, while Kwok unlocked his first door. The director was a longtime friend of his father's. He had no sense of humor, just like his father. Kwok flipped on the light switch to reveal the spacious room. "So I heard a strange thing today," the director said, his breath stale. Kwok said nothing. "I guess your silence means it's true then, eh? Are you saying we should accept it as good news?" This time, too, Kwok remained silent. His whole body felt sluggish from the alcohol. He wanted to collapse into bed and sleep. "Your father poured his blood, sweat, and tears into this building. If you end up selling it, you'd be going against his wishes." Kwok sat down. There were trophies and plaques displayed in the glass cabinet before him. The plaques started with the words, "This individual has contributed to the development of..." Kwok cherished these accolades. "Ajoshi, please stop beating around the bush. You still haven't realized I'm a simple guy. Let me be blunt here. You're 2 months late on rent. I'm sure you know the rent here is a lot cheaper than anywhere else in this area. I've let it go until now because you are my father's friend, but this building isn't right for an academy. What will kids learn from watching people go in and out of bars in the pool hall? You probably stayed because of the cheap rent, but I can't keep hanging on to this dirty, run-down building just for your sake." The director's pulse was starting to go up. He took a deep breath. "But you need to respect your father's dying wish." Kwok's lips twisted into a sneer. "You can't help sounding like a boring book, can you? But you're not my teacher anymore. Try begging me instead, because that might be more effective. And quit using my father as an excuse. He's dead." Slowly the director turned away. But inside him, the fire of a 20-year-old that hadn't yet been extinguished flared up. He faced Kwok once more. "Why would I expect anything different from you? Ever since you were a little boy, you did everything your father asked you not to do. All those times I warned him not to raise you that way, especially since you were an only child. Even in 1984, when you beat up your classmate and got arrested, I told him to leave you in jail for a few days to teach you a lesson, but he didn't listen. I've seen countless punks like you, and I know how they end up. After you sell this building, you'll squander all the money. When you've blown it all and have nothing left, you'll finally see you're a nothing, a nobody, and only then will you remember these words." Kwok stood up from his chair and strode toward the director. Nearly 2 feet taller, Kwok found himself looking down at the old man's smooth, bald head blooming with liver spots. The alcohol and drowsiness loosened his tongue. "For your information, it wasn't 1984. It was 1985. God, I'm so sick of your stupid lectures." He grabbed the director by the collar of his suit and hoisted him up so that his toes just grazed the ground. Kwok released him with a push and strode back to his chair. The director stumbled back, frantically windmilling both arms in the air, like duck's feet paddling furiously underwater. He reached out for something to grab, but there was nothing. All he had to do was move one foot back to steady himself. He'd been extremely agile as a young man, able to do a front tuck and land on his feet, but now he didn't even have time to take a step back. He fell helplessly. Even as he fell, he was angry with himself. Once again, his sense of balance, broken down with age, was to blame. He toppled backward into the glass cabinet. The glass shelves shattered and the trophies rained down on his face. He let out a deep breath.